Hello there, how are you doing? Hope you're keeping safe. Good afternoon from here in Hong Kong. I don't know what time it will be when you are watching this, but it's afternoon here. Another gorgeous sunny day. Unfortunately, I don't know if you've been to Hong Kong, gorgeous sunny day can be very nice when you're looking out of the window, but when you actually go outside and it's horribly humid, horribly hot day, and if you're wearing anything that isn't just t-shirt and a shorts, I rarely wear a t-shirt and shorts, it has to be said, then you end up sweating profusely. It's all very horrible. So yeah, roll on winter for me. I know most people won't agree with that, but there we go. Now, we've had a few developments here in Hong Kong. Lots of things have been going on. The most notable is that in terms of the COVID-19 crisis almost easing off, coming to an end, we've had very few cases here. The bars opened on Friday. So you could go back in a bar, you could go and see your friends, there were no issues. Social distancing measures still apply. Groups of 8 or more can be a bit of a problem. I think it's fewer in bars. Actually, I bizarrely didn't go into a bar despite being very pleased that they were reopened, but there we go. But as I said, and I've said in other videos, light at the end of the tunnel. So if you're feeling like you're cooped up and you're starting to go a bit crazy, don't worry, it isn't forever. We're not all going to be stuck indoors, onwards and upwards, a bit like, I know, what's the name of that film where the guy's trapped on the spaceship with the big garden on it? Can't remember. I think it might have been Bruce Dern who was the actual person in it. Anyway, if you know, let me know. Obviously, that's not the crux of this video, I have to stress. So what I'm looking at this week is something that I talked about in a podcast that was done in this very room with one of my friends and colleagues, Thomas Ho. And that was looking at who was likely to come out well of the coronavirus situation in tech and who was going to suffer. And the conclusions we drew back then was that essentially if you relied on software, if you're a software business or a streaming business, or your online content was something that you were almost making all of your money from, then you would be fine because more and more people would be consuming it. But the hardware providers or those who are in contracts where they need people on the ground would suffer. Looking back, this was in some ways quite a clever thing to say, but in other ways incredibly basic. So for this week, I've decided to do a bit of a straw poll around people I know, either in the industry, people I've been talking to in the office, or even just the general public, and ask who are the winners and losers in tech. So I've come up with 5 winners, 5 losers. I've kind of sorted them into as better an order I can. I've used a system which admittedly is winners on one set of cards, losers on another, and I'm going to pick them semi-randomly, and then I got someone to arrange them first. So let's see if they've actually tried to mess me up in how these work off. But anyway, I'd be curious to know what you think. I'd like you to get in touch, let me know who you think are the big winners and losers in tech. It doesn't have to be tech companies, as you'll see as I go through these. I mean, generally, who is essentially profiting from the COVID-19 situation and who is having a really, really rough time. And let's be honest, a lot of people are having a really, really rough time. Okay, let's kick off. Number 1, the first winner, big tech. Was there any doubt that big tech was going to do really well out of the COVID-19 situation? I don't think there was, but there must have been some doubt. Certainly was on my side that they would do as well as they have. I didn't predict Amazon to become essentially the go-to for supplies all over the world, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone. When I realized that there was a problem, I thought I need to get some masks just in case we need them. And for a while, the only masks that I had access to was something I'd ordered from Amazon while I was sitting in the airport thinking, things don't seem right. But it turns out everyone else was doing that. So Amazon has done incredibly well. They've changed their rules on shipping to some places. For example, until very recently, they wouldn't ship anything to Hong Kong anymore because they were dealing with increased demand. But they've kind of proved that they can be the supplier in a crisis. And that's good, because they have helped a lot of people out in a crisis, but also in some ways it can be quite bad because you become so reliant on one supplier. That's a story we can get into in a lot more detail later on. I would add in to Amazon, in terms of that big tech side, also the likes of Alibaba, who are essentially doing the same thing on the side of the world. Although more people have been ordering stuff off Alibaba, I do wonder sometimes if people are ordering ventilators off Alibaba, but there we go, and getting that delivered on the other side of the world too. Now, it's not just those guys. In terms of big tech, you have the likes of Facebook, as social media has massively taken off. Netflix is basically all that anyone's been watching. I guess Disney Plus, if they've got access to that too. It's still not properly in Hong Kong, in my view, but there we go. But big technology hasn't really faltered. Google has been doing fine and holding people's hands as more and more people have found themselves stuck online. So the big companies have got bigger. They've become more successful. They're becoming richer. they're going to be more powerful than they probably were before. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I know I talked last week about the Apple-Google matchup in terms of doing COVID-19 contact tracing, which I actually quite cool with their idea. I don't like the fact that other people are laying onto it some data privacy issues. But big tech is here to stay, and it's no myth that some of the biggest companies in the last 20 years have been tech companies. If you go back, say, to the 80s, then the likes of Microsoft, Google, Apple were nowhere as big as they were today. Well, you won't be surprised to know that while big tech has been doing incredibly well in the crisis, for startups, it's been a lot more difficult. Now, the reason this is not because of a technology reason. It's not because they don't have the tech to deal with it. It's not because they're not clever enough or they're not robust enough. They simply don't necessarily have enough money. If they're burning through their funding, trying to build something where nobody cares, nobody really wants to invest, unless it's some sort of health tech startup they think will be useful, unless it's something they think will make money, then they are going to struggle. So my hat goes off to them. And if you are working with or run a startup, don't give up. There is hope. Unfortunately, it seems that a lot of the hope these days maybe you'll get an investment from big tech, which takes me back to the winner from earlier. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I do think that the way that startups work now, it's very unlikely we're going to see someone like the next Facebook, a company that goes from being absolutely tiny to being huge. I think from now on you will find that the fingers of Facebook, Google and all the others are in there somewhere. But same as it ever was in some respects, you always found behind some of the big companies were famous investors invest in things all through the lifeblood of that career. So we'll see. All right, next winner. Yeah, the next winner, which you may not agree with, is Zoom. Now, I've spoken about Zoom at length. I was not very happy with the way that Zoom has handled its data privacy controls, how it hadn't really cared, it seemed, when data was being routed through China, when it may have forced companies to breach the GDPR. And I know a lot of companies have stopped using Zoom, and certainly anyone who's in a data-rich or a confidential environment thinks some of the risks of Zoom, whether true or not, are too great, so we're not going to go there. And that's fair enough. However, Zoom has become part of our language now. Are you joining a Zoom meeting? Let's have a Zoom meeting. So many classes around the world have been conducted via Zoom. So it's here to stay. I feel a little bit sorry for Microsoft Skype and indeed for Microsoft Teams, both perfectly good alternatives. In fact, there's lots of alternatives, let's be honest, I shouldn't just refer to those. But Zoom, because it managed to get into the media, despite all of its concerns, despite it being a bit like, well, security risk, not so bad, it's become a market leader. And I think it's in a position that it'll keep for quite some time unless there is some absolutely massive scandal or something better. Probably not necessarily better, but with a better, more catchy name, because let's face it, Zoom is a pretty good name, comes and takes its place. So losers, I feel like these are coming out in an order where they've been rigged. So the next loser, after I talk about Zoom, is data privacy. Okay, I don't know if you can actually see what's written on these cards. We'll hold them up, the line might be too bright. Data privacy, I think, might be one of the single biggest losers in terms of the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm not just talking about your data being leaked to another country thanks to Zoom or your computer being hacked. I'm talking about what I talked about last week in terms of contact tracing apps where our health data may be becoming something of a commodity, where we have to sacrifice some of our data privacy for the greater good. Now, a lot of people got in touch with me after that video, and I think they convinced me that it could be quite a bleak world for data privacy as more and more governments, keen to stop getting into the situation they've been in now, take a more robust view on what sort of data they want from their citizens and what they'll pass on to essentially third-party companies. I think this is a bad thing. You probably know I think this is a bad thing because I'm one of those people who thinks that personal data should be well protected, but I don't think there's anything we can really do to avoid it. I know there are lots of people speaking up against it, but as I said last week, when your argument is you don't want to provide this data, so therefore you're happy for people to die, it's kind of a tricky one to come back from. And I'll be honest with you, I'm seeing this argument being made online as we speak. So that is a big loser. I kind of hope that one would have been at the end because I think it's the biggest. But on to the next winner. Yeah, this one is true. Remote working. How many of you are remote working right now when you're watching this? I'd be very curious to hear. Now, I did remote working for a relatively short period of time. Hong Kong, I'll be honest with you, isn't a place that's massively built on remote working. Now, a few reasons for that. One of the reasons, which you may know if you've seen a previous video, is our apartments are very, very small. There's nowhere really to remote work. You've never seen, oh maybe you did see in one of the videos, the area where I work. It's cool, it's got screens, it's got a webcam, I can do my work, but it is surrounded by boxes, and if I was to nudge my chair just the wrong way, there's a danger that all the boxes would fall on me, and I suppose it would be a Microsoft Teams meeting to remember for everyone else as I'm crushed under the weight of books, shoes, what else would be in there, waistcoat type of, they're not very heavy, and who knows what. So that doesn't lend itself, but also we've got a bit of a culture here in Hong Kong in terms of presenteeism. So this goes back a long way. I remember working, and I think law firms are quite bad for this. I used to work with a junior, he's now no longer at the firm, he's gone somewhere else. And I always used to notice no matter how late I stayed in the office, even though I was more senior and probably had things that I need to do quite late, normally calls with other jurisdictions, he'd still be there. So I got very curious to whether he was, I didn't know what he was doing. I was like, he must have finished everything I asked him to do today. So I once sort of went out the front door and came back in through the back to see if he was still there when I sort of did a block around the office. And he'd gone. He was just waiting for me to leave. It was pure presenteeism. That makes remote working one of those things where you worry that bosses, they don't know where you are, therefore they don't think you're actually doing any work. But I think, thanks to this crisis where people have had to do work and people have been productive, that remote working has benefited. And that's in Hong Kong. So what will I see? Well, you can expect that people think, well, do I need all this very expensive office space in Hong Kong, in London, in New York, when I can just get my employees to work from home? And in many cases, they may prefer it. It may be easier in terms of their childcare duties. It may be a much shorter commute. It may be an easier life all round, so it's win-win. We save money on the premises. We don't have to spend a load of money on electricity. We may have to spend a bit on IT kit to make sure it all works, but everyone's happy. So remote working is a winner, and I can see that one staying with us for a very, very long time. That really will be, I think, the new normal. Unless, of course, you don't trust your staff not to go and do something else when they should be working. Certainly, a bunch of people in Hong Kong went hiking when they went to working. And obviously not tech lawyers, they posted what they were doing on Instagram. Well done, guys. Okay, next one. Oh, this is an interesting one. But I guess it kind of goes with the remote working thing. The next loser is work-life balance. Now, there's been a move, certainly, in the last few years to try and promote more work-life balance. If you've ever worked in a law firm, like I work in a law firm, you'll know that law firms always talk about how important work-life balance is, but that often becomes a bit of a problem when people are very busy and you think, oh God, you've got to finish at all costs. And frankly, most clients may not care whether you've got something you need to do outside of work, they just need a deal done. But that's changing. Clients understand a bit more, and people have come to realize that if you don't recharge your batteries, if you don't have time to have a life outside of work, you end up becoming a much less productive worker. You become very, very miserable, maybe mental health issues, and it's just not a good scenario to be in. Or is it? Remember, this is a loser rather than a winner. A lot of people have reported that with remote working, they feel the need to be on call all of the time. They're essentially in a position where they can never switch off because you've got no excuse to switch off, because essentially your boss knows with the technology that's been provided that you're available at any hour of the day. Now, that may not be true. That may just be a perception that you have, going back into the presenteeism bit. But I think that work-life balance is at risk. Steps need to be taken by organizations, not essentially to allow their employees, it's not like they're necessarily forcing them in the first place, but not to allow their employees to get caught in this trap where they think they're on call 24/7 and they slowly burn out. One thing that's been done certainly within my law firm here is a mindful business charter where we basically say, look, if we're asking you to do something after a particular hour, we'll be mindful of the fact that it's outside your normal working hours. We won't make you sit in your house drafting some document in the middle of the night unless it's absolutely necessary. We'll be respectful of your personal time. So unless more organizations adopt that model, then I think this on-call culture will damage work-life balance, and yeah, it will be one of the losers. Just cast your mind back. For those who remember, we've all got smartphones now, but remember, think of the time when you had like essentially a dumb cellular phone, and you saw people were getting BlackBerries. You thought, well, this is great. They can be on call anytime, they can answer emails, check emails, anywhere they are. They can work on the train into the office, they can work when they get home. If they're a bit bored, they can look at their BlackBerry and see who's emailed them. And you thought it was cool, and then you got one, and then you discovered, I'm checking my emails in the middle of the night. If you're really bad, you had your BlackBerry next to your bed to buzz when you got an email. And of course, if you're an international organisation, it's buzzing through the night. Some of it is our fault, but I do think if we're not careful, work-life balance is a huge loser. Let's face it, most of us are tied to our phones almost all the time. Right, the next winner. This must be number, should have kept count really. I'll do that in post-production. I think it's number 4. The next winner is the gig economy. Now, it's interesting when someone said this to me. I was like, the gig economy, really? Nobody can really do anything. These people have been in lockdown. But actually, if you think about it, the gig economy, these are companies, often delivery companies, where you provide a one-off service and someone helps you out with a one-off thing. Been doing surprisingly well. Food delivery is the obvious one. The likes of Deliveroo, Food Panda, which we have in Hong Kong, and I presume we have in other places too. I've been watching some UK, this is an odd thing, but I like watching other countries' TV commercials for reasons that are best left unexplained. But I've seen more ads for those delivery companies. Certainly in terms of, I can see there being a future where groceries, rather than having just the slots in a supermarket, you find that you can essentially use a company will then get someone to go and do all the shopping for you and bring your shopping there. Maybe it already exists. If it doesn't exist, don't copy it and then become a multi-billionaire and then say, oh, well, Haswell gave me the idea. But gig economy companies have done really well, I think, unless there's something where you basically have to have a group of people in one place. The gig economy is one of those things that I could have an entire video on the pros and cons of that. It's good in that it enables these services you may not get otherwise, or they'd be tied to a particular institution. And the companies behind them are doing incredibly well. But I often worry then, when you're working in the gig economy, there's lots of news about Uber drivers, how well are they treated? There's lots of news about Deliveroo drivers, how well are they treated? Then it could be a bit of a double-edged sword. But I don't doubt that the gig economy will continue to increase in size, not least because we'll see unemployment rates rise in more traditional jobs. All right, the next loser. So the next loser is employees in the gig economy. I feel like I've almost answered that one already. But suppose that you've lost your job. Suppose you're in the US at the moment, which is facing probably the worst depression it's seen for a very long time. And you go from an employment contract where you may have some rights and benefits to joining, I don't know, being a driver for one of these startups who offer no rights to their drivers. You've had to provide all of the service, you've had to provide the car essentially, you're providing your labour when you're working, but you're not getting anything in return other than a share, so you're obviously paying commission back to whoever the gig economy company is in return for the work you've done. And I feel like as the gig economy grows in size, unless there is some regulation, then I think the workers will suffer. I think it's coming. Some jurisdictions are already taking that on, but it's kind of an evil side of tech. If you think of some of the scandals that Amazon had where people were saying, oh, their warehouse staff aren't paid properly or not looked after, it's one of those things that they'll have to deal with. So I think many of them are dealing with it already, but it's going to get worse if people don't do something soon. So that's the next loser. All right, the last winner, and this was an obvious one. I think I may have hinted at this a little bit at the beginning. And I guess in some ways it's still part of big tech. And that is social media and streaming platforms. Facebook got lots of bad press, didn't it? Everyone was, oh, Facebook is stealing all of my data. It's using all this data without my knowledge. I've given it too much data away. Similarly with other social media platforms. But in the time of people being locked down, social media was often the only way for people to stay in touch. It was the only way, essentially, for people to make sure they had the contacts and the communications they would have in their day-to-day lives. And it showed the benefit of social media platforms. It showed the benefit of Facebook, taking aside the obvious privacy concerns that crop up every time someone says Facebook. Look at these videos. I've gone from doing what would normally be a talk in front of people in a room on a topic like this, which I would do one maybe every 3 to 4 months to a weekly video which goes onto LinkedIn, it's hosted on YouTube, and anyone can visit it. So that is a massive win. I mean, it's something that I've carried on doing even when I could probably now speak on a platform in front of a load of people if I wanted to. So I think social media has found its way. I think it's found the fact that it has to be a bit more responsible, which is we're getting there on that, but it's also found how beneficial and how important it is and how it's essentially now an essential service. We often can't live without social media. Streaming platforms too. Now this isn't just the fact that everyone's been watching Netflix, I have to stress. It's also the fact that we're finding films being streamed before they make it to the cinema. I think Trolls World Tour, probably not my taste in films, but there we go. You probably know what my taste is from all the previous videos, probably sci-fi and horror, but there we go. But Trolls World Tour couldn't get a cinema release, so it was streamed, and it did incredibly well through streaming. More people are creating content just to be streamed. Lady Gaga's online concert to raise money was all streamed. It's going to be more of the way we consume content. It already is a lot, but it's going to take even more of the pie from traditional content. And I wonder whether we will start to see, and certainly Netflix, when it's produced its original movies and they've been on Netflix, not at the cinema, or they've had a limited release, whether more things will not make it to cinemas, will not make it to home formats, but everything will be streamed. So streaming, it's already been going through the roof. It's just been pushed up through the stratosphere. So the last loser. The last loser is a bit of a cop-out. But the last loser is essentially anything which is not big tech. Now think about this for a minute. So if you're in a retail business who don't necessarily have any sort of online presence, who can't really sell anything, and your shop's been shut for who knows how long, and essentially you've been able to bring in any income and you've had to pay staff, which because you're not in the gig economy, you can't necessarily just lay them off and say we can't pay you anymore, then you're in trouble. You're probably facing massive financial difficulty, and we will see lots of businesses go under. Similarly, if you're in the food business, if you run a restaurant, suppose again that you're not getting a Deliveroo driver to deliver meals on your behalf, though if not, why not? That's probably the lifeline that you had. But maybe you couldn't get your staff to be in there to do the cooking, who knows? Then you are going to face an absolute disaster too. It feels like if you haven't embraced tech, be it big tech or tech at all, then you're at a disadvantage. But if you haven't got the support of big tech, then you have suffered the most during the COVID-19 crisis. Now this may be a contentious point, but I feel like that gives a certain element of power to big tech that we may need to be concerned about. I don't know. Let's see how it's used or abused or how it's dealt with. But it means that if you're not at the heart of it, a technology-led business, if you don't have some element of big tech running through your veins, or if you're not affiliated with a big tech company, then you may find that you're one of the big losers. Perhaps not the biggest loser, but one of the big losers in the COVID-19 crisis. And I worry about that. I think the world has changed irreparably as a result of what's happened in the last few months. It's been a really interesting ride. I'm one of those people who, perhaps annoyingly, whenever something goes wrong or something happens that's unexpected, I'm always like, wow, that's really cool, that's so exciting. And then I go, oh, actually, maybe that wasn't quite so good. So I'm always very excited about things before realizing there could be a problem, which is one of those, I guess I'm one of those nerdy people in terms of tech. But then the lawyer in me always thinks, maybe I should just be seeing the dark side of this, and maybe I need to be a bit more pessimistic. I think maybe we may need to be a bit more pessimistic, and I hope I am proved wrong. But anyway, that's 5 of each, 5 winners, 5 losers. I would be very, very interested on your feedback and your suggestions of what you think the winners and losers have been in terms of tech. Be as broad as you like, because I think what I might do is then compile it into another video. If you have any comments or suggestions, then I'll throw them in too. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I said at the beginning, actually interesting, whilst I've been doing this video, the sun has gone down. But whilst we in Hong Kong feel like we're very much coming to the end of the crisis, many people are still there. And I think those developments will continue to shape. We'll still have more winners, more losers. We'll see how bad it is for the losers, whether they can bounce back. We'll see whether the winners remain going through the stratosphere, as I suggested, or whether actually things go back to what I like to think of as the new normal. But then what is the new normal? All we know is it's not the same as the old normal. I should have been a philosopher with that comment. Anyway, That's the end of this video for this week. I hope you are doing very well. Enjoy the rest of your week and do get in touch if you've got anything you'd like to ask or say, either in the comments on LinkedIn or the comments on YouTube, or you can email me if you want to as well. I will make sure there's a link to that somewhere too. But in the meantime, stay safe. If the bars reopen, don't go crazy. Trust me, I imagine after weeks and weeks of home drinking, outside drinking may come as a bit of a surprise or a shock to the system, but maybe you can relive those times when you were drinking cheap cider in the park. I want to stress that I've never been drinking cheap cider in the park. Actually, I think it was 2020, but there we go. Anyway, have a good one, everyone. I'll be back very, very soon.